Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Teach Me Teacher. I wanted to give a quick FYI before you go ahead and dive into this awesome episode I did with Melinda Bolles about technology. We did have some technical difficulties that led to some odd, inconsistencies in the audio. I don't think it detracts from the actual message of what we ended up hitting on, which is some great stuff. But I wanted to just kind of put this at the beginning just so you know that I'm aware of the issues and they will be definitely fixed in later episodes. Hello everyone and welcome to Teach Me Teacher, a podcast for educators, where we, the teachers, become students ourselves. I'm your host, Jacob Chastain, and today we'll be learning about the pros and cons of using technology in the classroom. So picture this. You wake up, you turn your TV on. You wake up, you turn on your computer. You wake up and grab your phone. The reality is that technology is a part of our lives more than ever. And while those of us who are a bit older grew up and embraced technology later, younger generations are growing up with technology and seemingly evolving with it. The problem is that many of the young people who are familiar with technology are not developing the skills they need to succeed in higher education and in the workforce. They're interacting with it every day, but not developing research skills, project management, or multitasking proficiency. This leads a lot of districts and schools to the conclusion that we should start teaching students not only how to use technology, but teach them how to use it in a way that enhances their learning. But when it comes to using technology in the classroom, where do we start? What do you use? Is technology the be-all, end-all in the classroom? Or are there limits to using this and having a blended classroom? Here with us today to help us with these questions and a few more is my first mentor, Mrs. Melinda Bolles from Richland Middle School. Mrs. Bolles, how are you doing today?
Fabulous.
Are you?
Yes.
Looks like you got some sun. Have you been out doing things this summer?
Yes.
Yeah?
Well, full disclosure, it is the middle of summer. Right in the middle of July, so we'll see how this goes.
But anyway, to get into the meat of this podcast, I really want to start with kind of your background, just because, I know a little bit about it, but I want people to know you before we really dive into how you use technology and things like that. So go ahead and start off. What happened with you in the beginning? Where did you start and where are you now?
Okay, so I just finished my 18th year of education, the first 15 being in elementary school. I taught 5th grade. All of those years, my very first year was in Grand Prairie, taught 1 year there, and then the next 14 years I spent in Grapevine Colleyville at the same school in virtually the same classroom, teaching the same thing, which I loved. And then the opportunity to teach middle school came about, and so I took that. Just finished my 3rd year teaching 8th grade U.S. history.
Nice. So once you got to middle school, did you feel like there was more of a pressure to use technology, or how did that look in regards to elementary school to middle school?
In elementary school, there's a lot more time to use it with your students because you have. And in my situation, I had my kids for, 2.5 hour chunks. So it was easy enough to get technology out and play with it. And if stuff fell apart, then it was enough. You had time to kind of pull it back together. So in middle school, the time crunch is an issue in everything that you do, but especially in technology, because if you spend 5 minutes logging everybody in and dealing with those issues, and then 5 minutes at the end putting everything away, you've lost 10 minutes of instructional time. So there were more issues, I think, once I hit middle school than there were with elementary kids. But by middle school, they also have been accessing technology for a lot longer. So there were some things that were a lot more digitally native to them than 5th graders necessarily.
Yeah. So do you remember, and if you don't, it's okay, but do you remember, as you were, going through your years of teaching, when it started becoming like a thing, like teachers, because today I feel like, we talk about technology all the time. Like it's everywhere. If you're on social media and follow teacher, social media posts or whatever, they always talk about technology. You go to trainings, they talk about technology. It's everywhere, it seems like. When did that start being the case for you?
It was a very slow progression. I started teaching almost 20 years ago. And so technology was, you had a desktop in your classroom, and that was for the teacher to use. Your kids didn't have access to most of the technology, especially what they have now. In Grapevine Colleyville, there was a push for digital classrooms, and I got in on the second wave of those. So at our school, there was only one other digital classroom when I became a digital classroom 4 years ago. And now at that school, I believe they're on a one-to-one kind of situation, which is not the case virtually anywhere that I know of that is successful at any rate, because, you know, they push out the technology, but they don't follow through with the training and that kind of thing. But having students be able to access outside of the four walls of their physical classroom has always been something I've never relied fully on a textbook, because the information is just not all there. It's one perspective, one set of history, and I've always wanted them to know more, to kind of tackle those things on their own instead of me feeding it to them by reading a textbook and answering questions.
Yeah, and I don't know, I mean, when it comes to technology, every time, the reason I think I like it and the reason I think districts are pushing it are for a variety of reasons, but the two that I see the most important is, one, it seems like it's more effective in terms of getting the proper material in front of students, right? I mean, you put out a textbook, you give them a textbook, it's already outdated. It's extremely expensive to get in the first place. They get destroyed. What do you do then, right? The process of even approving textbooks, if you've ever been on the committee, which I know you've had time doing, which we won't get into, but it's a process, and it's painful, and, you know, it's easier to be like, hey, there's this great vetted website I want you guys to look at. And check this out. So it is good on that point, you know, from that perspective. But when it comes to like engagement, I think that's the thing that everyone's going for, because it's, you know, it's one thing, this is the proper material in front of you. This is the information you need. This is updated. But what have you seen on the engagement side? Because people seem to go, totally engaging. They love their phones. Clearly, if I give them this history assignment that they can read on the internet, they're going to totally engage. Is that true?
Not always, no. There is some digital citizenship that you have to kind of work in there too, because they know how to use their phones, but they know how to use it for Snapchat and social media and those other things. And that is completely different than the academic setting of what responsibility is.
So digital citizenship, go define that for us, just for people that are unfamiliar.
Just being, understanding that everything you put out there lives out there forever, that there's no way to kind of take those things back. So, you know, not bullying online, but also not putting things out there that you don't want your future self to not be hired for. If you put out pictures of yourself half-dressed, at some point you're not going to be able to get a job because of those pictures, or your, you know, drunken self, the crunk bear that we talked about in the training that we did in Birdville. Just that whole idea of putting yourself out there and showing everything eventually is not going to get you hired, or, you know,
and
those kinds of things.
I'm interested in how you brought this up to your students, because that's a concept adults don't get a lot of the time. Is that the things you put out in the world other people see, and not everyone has the same sense of humor, right? Not everyone has the same network as you do, so they don't get the inside jokes that you might be going for. So how do you get, you know, it's hard to get adults to get that way, but how do you get students to understand that, hey, maybe I shouldn't take these certain types of pictures, or maybe I shouldn't say I'm doing these types of things on my own time?
It's not something I've really ever been able to tackle fully. I haven't had an opportunity to really have my students post a lot online. I have them go searching for things, but I haven't really had them, you know, set themselves out there in the academic setting. It is a goal I have, especially in the coming years, to have them, you know, respond in a blog sort of way, but encouraging also that you're putting yourself out there and this is what that should look like. There are a couple of programs, and I'd have to look up the one that I'm thinking about, but there is a whole set of digital citizenship kind of lessons that you can go through with your kids. Timing with everything is such a huge issue, though, when it comes to that, because I have X number of objectives I have to include, and none of those are digital citizenship. So I have to kind of weave those in there when I can, and sometimes that's what falls off when American history is what I have to get across to them. Yeah,
and I mean, that's a good point, too. That's something you don't think about, is not only, you know, are you trying to be, you know, cutting edge, and that might not be the right word, but you're trying to get things that are useful to the students, but there are boundaries,
expectations.
When you
On
open
me.
doors to other, and it's that's a big thing. So how do you overcome that? I mean, is that, you said you let it, sometimes that is something that falls away because you have to do your standards, you have your goals you have to do in your classroom. Are there any tricks that you've developed that kind of helps, or do you just kind of hit it and go?
I usually just kind of hit it and go. My goal next year is to kind of present students with an overall question that they have to answer, and then present them with different ways that they can find the answers to that question, but putting it more on students. And it's been a goal of mine for a long time, but then I get caught up in, well, these are the standards you have to teach. And so that's always, once you hit the road running, and then it's like, ooh, we've got to get all of this stuff done, and that kind of falls away. So I'm hoping to get that kind of started right at the beginning, where I set up a place, with flexible seating and all of those kinds of things, but that they have an opportunity to, if the textbook is where they need to go to find the answer, then that's where they go to find the answer. But if the internet is where they need to go, then that's where they need to go. And then setting up a way for them to respond online where other people can respond to them. Blog kind of thing, or a podcast, or, whatever. But,
and there's digital tools for that.
Yes, letting them kind of figure out what's the best way I want to present my information to the world and have them respond to me.
Sure.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, and I almost wonder if that's a really good connection to, because, it's the whole idea of being self-aware, right? The metacognitive process of learning and applying that to a classroom, almost, using technology, at least the way you're talking about it. It almost comes with that piece if you do it right.
Right.
Because they're forced to think about how they're presenting themselves. They're forced to think about, what, I really do believe this. But if you get to that level, then they have to go, but is this something I want to put out there?
Right.
Or is this really the best belief I could have right now? Right? And that's a big filter, though. That's a lot to ask of a 13-year-old to have, or a 12-year-old, or
but
whatever.
But you have those kids who want to podcast.
Sure.
And those kids that don't.
Yeah.
And so hopefully giving them an opportunity to, those that want to podcast do, and those that would rather write it out, do some sort of blog, but still having that interaction with the world, breaking down the four walls of the portable where I live.
Sure.
And having them reach out to other, whoever, students across the world even, or just even within Birdville School District or whatever. I haven't quite figured that part out yet.
Yeah. The thing I was thinking about is you have these ideas, and right now we're speaking in pretty vague terms. We're using a lot of buzzwords and all that. So let's bring it down to the micro level. Let's bring it out to your classroom, your portable. What does this look like? What does a technology class look like? And I know you're not doing full-on technology and stuff like that, but let's give some of the listeners kind of what you're working with so they have a better picture of really what you're doing in your class.
Okay. Last year did not go as well as I would have liked it to, just because everybody knows that technology, as soon as you open the box, that technology is out of date. I was working with a class set of iPads that were out of date. And so I had more tech problems last year than I did tech successes. So I kind of chucked that year away.
Right.
And with the bond that we're getting with the district this year, we're going to have new technology, but it's not going to be a class set. I won't have a one-to-one situation in my classroom. And I'm okay with that, because I think what my plan will be is there will be digital tools available to students, Chromebooks or Dell laptops or whatever it is that the district officially finally puts in our classroom. But also students will be allowed to use their own devices on the school wireless network. But the goal is to kind of present a question. Why did colonists feel they needed to separate from England, for example? And then have them, I'll have possibly some websites for them to go look at, tell them what pages in each of the 4 different textbooks that I have in my classroom, what sections those are from, but have them go in and look at what real reasons, but I really want them to kind of look at different perspectives and different biases and different situations so that they can kind of have a full picture of why they would really do this, put themselves in this situation, and then respond to that. So there will be potentially center-like, and that's a very elementary term, I know, but
Sure.
the technology will be in a space that they could use it, or move it to a space where they would feel most comfortable. My ultimate goal is to have several different types of seating in the room so that students can kind of choose where physically they would work best and what tools would help them work best. If they're a reader, read and answer questions kind of person, then I'll have those resources available, but I would also have technology resources available. That's the big plan.
So it sounds yeah, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot to
But it's also
take
July 6th.
Sure.
So my
Things can
grand
change.
schemes often dwindle a
Yeah,
little bit
I mean,
by August 20th or whatever the first day of class is.
Yeah, and I think that's just a good point for anyone in education, is that you always have these big dreams. When you start implementing things fall away, you get better ideas, you tighten it up usually because that's what you need to do. Because time is the issue.
Sure.
But from what I'm hearing that you're saying, it almost seems like rather than going full on technology is the boss, we're going to use this, it's more like you're opening up your lesson plan to incorporate their choice to blend the learning when they feel like they need to blend it.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
So how do you teach them to choose the right thing? Like, how does that play into it?
The first couple of weeks, my goal is to teach them what it looks like to use each of the different tools available to them, what it looks like to write Cornell notes, or what it looks like to look at a website and really pull off what you need, what it looks like to legally copy and paste pictures from the internet and cite those sources and that kind of stuff. So that, and we'll kind of go through, my goal is to have like little mini modules of, putting the content in there, but showing them how to do each of these, and then kind of working with them in a workshop model sort of way on how best do you take in information, how best do you go find things, and how best do you take in information so that you can give that back to the world.
So what type of restrictions are you going to do this? Obviously, you wouldn't just throw everything available on every device and stuff like that. So what's the teacher side of this? Yeah, they're getting the choice, but what are you doing to kind of put blinders on them and make sure that the same kid isn't always just using internet articles, and he is moving around the room and using different things?
Probably the goal is, and of course I'm speaking in goals because it is July 6th, if we've already mentioned several times, and so my plans are really big at this point, but the idea is a kind of menu, differentiation is a big buzzword right now, and so the whole idea of a menu, like these are the things that everybody has to do. There are X number of things that everybody has to do under this umbrella, and then here are some things that you can do, and you get to choose how you do them and where you do them. Collaborating with peers will be a requirement. You can be that student who wants to sit at a desk by themselves all the time for some of what you do, but sometimes you have to talk with other people, and sometimes you have to collaborate and work with them. So the plan is to have within each kind of unit, here's the overall question, and here are some things that you have to do to answer that question, but then here are a multitude of things that you can do, also your choice to answer the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, because I do like it because it's freedom for them, but then you're kind of stepping in, and you're, the requirements and the parameters, I guess is a better word, is how you kind of guide it. And I guess that's kind of the element of workshop too. Yeah. Is, you give them their little area or section to work on. The choice is still there, but, you're still doing your job in regards to all right, these are the boundaries. Yeah.
These are the objectives you still need to hit.
Yeah.
And then there will be an assessment. And if you are successful at that assessment, you move on. And if you're not, then we sit and talk about what we need to learn in order to be successful with those objectives.
So speaking of talking with them, is that a conference thing that you're going to try to implement, or is a conference time, or how do you think you're going to work that into this process?
I'm going to try to kind of in my brain at this point, it's here's the question for the week. On Monday, we do the kind of mini lesson on Monday, and here's, we're going to kind of all group together, and this is what we're looking at. And then Tuesday through Friday, they have time to kind of go out and do those things the required things. They'll be required to have some sort of technology, touch base with technology. They'll have some sort of requirement to touch base with another person, those kinds of things. The opportunity to do things outside of class, flipped lessons and those sort of things would also be available to them. If they don't have the opportunity to do it outside of class, then they can do it in class. But then by Friday, if you haven't already done so, you have some sort of mastery assessment that you have to complete. If you complete it on Wednesday, then you have some time to work on further extending your knowledge on the subject or going into a passion project, which is completely a whole other podcast that we won't get into that. But just that idea that you get to, enrich your learning on what you're doing if you have mastered what you need to, back to the differentiation. If you can master it by Wednesday, then you can have Thursday and Friday to do whatever. If you're still struggling on Friday with the information, then we need to work with each other outside of class, in a tutoring kind of session.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the goal, is that present them with a question, here are your options, and then meet with students regularly throughout the week to make sure they're doing what they need to do in order to hit that mastery by Friday. And that's, a nebulous Friday.
The elephant in the room with all of this, when you start talking about differentiation, in my experience, teachers sit back and they go, grading, right? The grading issue pops up, and it pops up a lot. And it's, if you've ever sat in any group of teachers, that word is going to pop up when you start talking about changing things for students, having different assignments, let alone having them be who chooses it, right? Because it's not going to work out perfect. You're not going to have everyone do that assignment that gets automated graded in the system. Some are going to want to write papers, however you set up your class. So how are you tackling this beast? Do you have a secret for the differentiation grading process, or basically what's your philosophy with this? How can you tell that teacher listening to this right now, rolling their eyes going, I can't do this because I don't have grading time? What's your response to that?
Ultimately, every student is responsible for the same objectives, the same standards. In Texas, it's the TEKS, the Texas Essential, blah, 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 blah. So whatever those standards are, and in social studies, it's 108 for the year.
No, such a small number.
Such a small number. In 8th grade social studies anyway. So the goal is just, here are the standards, and that's what my assessment will look like. And it will be... The goal, again, the goal is my favorite word, I guess, today, is to have a sort of rubric that addresses those standards that would fit multiple modes of student interaction. So if they were to write something and I have this rubric with the standards, these are the things I need you to learn. That's what I would be looking for in writing, or in listening to a podcast, or in watching a video that you put together, or in creating some sort of anchor chart. These are the things that I would be looking for mastery, and it would be the same for all students. So
it'd be like the same rubric, literally, and it doesn't matter how they present the work to you.
Potentially, that would be the goal.
That's a cool idea. It's challenging,
yes.
But my wheels are turning because I haven't heard this idea before. But it's kind of cool that you would set up, I don't know, I guess in my head, like a chart or whatever, a rubric. I haven't seen a rubric. Set up a rubric. You have your standards, what it means at each level to meet that.
Right.
And then you can clearly see that whether they're, making a video, or they wrote a paper, or they drew a comic book or whatever, right? I guess that's right.
Yeah,
Same
that's
idea.
The goal. Yeah.
That's cool. I really do like that idea. I mean, rubrics, depending if you're a good rubric maker, some are easy, some to grade, some aren't. But for the most part, it's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
But no, I really like that idea, and it's something that you can hand out pretty early.
Yes.
And go, you know what to do. You at least know what you need to master in order to
Well, and that
pass.
would be what I would touch base with in individual conferences or small group conferences. Where are you on here? What have you already accomplished? And what do you think you already know? And what do you not know?
Sure.
And what can I do to help you get there? Not do it for you, not spoon feed it to you, but what can I do to help you get there? What resources can I make available to you?
Yeah. So I want to tell a small story with just my experience with doing something similar to this. At the end of last year, I had the last 6 weeks, roughly to kind of experiment with what I wanted to do this year. Just because I love changing up things, I love experimenting. Anyone who's ever met me knows that. So yes. I just changed my whole class for the last 6 weeks, and I gave them, they knew exactly what they needed to do every week. They knew what was coming. They knew the grade. Or not the grade, but they knew it was expected to get the grade, etc. But the thing that was hard for me now, I'm teaching 6th graders. A little bit younger than 8th graders.
Yes.
Which is what you're handling right now. The one thing I ran into that I didn't think about was self-pacing and what that means for a young person starting to understand how to keep themselves on task. Because what happened is I had pre-AP students, hardworking students, and GT students that generally, they kept themselves on task, but it was more like a last-minute thing. Because just because they're hard workers doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the work done early.
Right.
They got the work done, but it was like a last-minute thing. So there was a lot of class time that wasn't used to its maximum potential.
Sure.
But then you have your, on-level students or struggling students who a lot of the time would just kind of choose the one thing they were okay at or good at, and they would stay there, and they would just take a lesser grade on the other parts. Right. So that going into next year, knowing that I want to do something similar to this, the workshop model to where they have, their designated times to do that, what advice would you give to me or to yourself, or what are you thinking about in order to keep kids on self-paced? Do you think it's easier with 8th graders, or what kind of walls are you trying not to butt yourself into?
I don't think it's easier with 8th graders. I don't think it's easier with adults. I mean, I think that there are plenty of adults. I mean, I struggle sometimes with a project that is looming and waiting until the very last minute to slam it together and turn it in. I mean, that's procrastination, I feel like, is kind of human nature. That's where I hope that the one-on-one time, that Monday, for example, I spend, here's the question, here are some resources that you can use in doing that sort of mini lesson in a grander scheme. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we spend time, that's where I touch base with students. Okay, what are you doing to answer this question? Which of these projects are you choosing? Is that really the best way to go? Is that really where you're strongest? Using some multiple intelligences kind of testing, and I say that with like air quotes or whatever, at the beginning of the year, just to kind of get an idea where each student is, kind of know who my podcasters are and who my writers are and who my, picture drawers are, and touching base with them, but not just so that the picture drawer always draws pictures, but the picture drawer also steps out of their comfort zone and podcasts a little. Or the, writer steps out of their comfort zone and adds some pictures into what they're doing, but just kind of stretching their, what they are able to do, but touching base with them. I think that's the biggest thing, is you can't just throw it out there on Monday and then sit back and say, oh, I'm done for the week. I'll wait till we get the test on Friday to see how everybody's doing. That the whole idea of formative assessment, which I know is another buzzword, whole other podcast. I'm not even going to get into that.
It's coming.
Just touching base with students on a regular basis to say, where are you? What are you learning? What do you already know about the answer to this question that you think you are working towards?
Formative assessment, and I know I don't want to jump into too much about it.
Yeah,
because it is its own episode.
Itself, sure.
But I would say one of the things that I struggle with is probably doing formative assessment regularly. I can know generally kind of where my students are at, what they know and what they don't based on our interactions, the conversations happening in the room. But a lot of the time, time gets away from you. Before you know it, it's Friday. Test comes up. Boom. You realize they did not understand.
They don't know anything.
And they didn't master what you wanted them to master. And now you have choices that are, hard to do, which is, circle back, reteach, when to reteach, how that ever works it into your schedule, let alone having 108 standards. But, even with the shorter, ELA standards, there's still, for every teacher, every content, that's like, that's the nightmare.
There's not time to go back necessarily to do it.
So how do you think technology can fuel that? So say you aren't using technology that much and you jump in, have you ever had anything be successful with circling back without you having to take your entire class back or delay the classroom?
I haven't necessarily had any success with that, except for, the whole idea of a flipped lesson, which is students have to access it on their own outside of their classroom time. Seems like would be the easiest no-brainer way to do that kind of thing. But in social studies, it's kind of weird. Flipped lessons for me has always been a pretty easy concept for a math class or for a science class, where you teach the concept and then they come to class and they do the work or do the experiment. So I haven't really figured out how to do that in the social studies classroom, except that I know of so many great videos that fit with my content really well. So why wouldn't I set those up for students to do it outside of class with an expectation of, what you need to be able to come back to the classroom with. But digitally formative assessments are easier in a sense that if you have, if you set up like a Google form, but if you're doing it all multiple choice, that's always easier, but multiple choice isn't always the way to go.
Right.
The way I have trouble with formative assessments. I don't have as much trouble giving it to them. Here's a 3, 2, 1. Write this on your index card and hand it to me on your way out the door. That's easy. It's having time to look at 150 of them and then reevaluate next day what I need to change when there aren't 108 standards or 45 standards or 72 standards, whatever. The timing for looking at that and reevaluating how I'm going to go. So that is where I would think that the one-on-one, I would be able to tell. Now, am I going to be able to reach 150 students in 3 days? I'm not sure.
Yeah, right.
That's one of those things that I will have to kind of play with, but I'm hoping that at the end of each day I can say, well, here's your exit ticket, and doing it digitally saves me paper and going through that, because I can kind of look at, if I use Google form or whatever, and then I have a spreadsheet, and I go, ooh, this kid doesn't know at all. That's who I'm touching base with first tomorrow. I'm kind of looking at that kind of thing. I don't know. Yeah. No,
I think, honestly, I was kind of problem solving, just, listening to you and kind of bouncing off. And it seems like, now we're going to the territory of just brainstorming, but it's good stuff. So it would almost seem like a landing page of some sort on your website or in your Google Classroom, whatever you're using, to have it to where, after the test, the standards they missed, very clearly what they know and what they don't know. You can, it seems like it would almost be good that, like, if you didn't meet this threshold of a grade, whether you make that passing or higher or lower,
right,
whatever, then they have to do some type of assignment there, and they can do that in tutorials with you. If they need the one-on-one, people might assign mandatory tutorials, or it can be something they do outside of class, and they bring it back to you, and it's good. So that seems like, a small way you could implement technology, like, if you're really in a crunch time, just having that page where you can create that, let's remaster this maybe with a video or some type of an assignment, creative, etc. Right? So, I know we just stepped into brainstorming, but just an idea for the listeners of the podcast. But so we've already said a couple things. We've talked about Google Classroom briefly, Google Forms. Google does all these things. What are the programs that you've used successfully? Because there's a lot of them.
There are a lot of them. And Pinterest is every teacher's best friend. And I use it all the time. But anytime I come across a list of the 25 best apps to use, I don't even look at those.
Yeah. Because
as a social studies teacher, especially now of middle school students, apps are not really the way I go with any of that kind of thing. The two things that I use the most in my classroom, Google Classroom, because everything is paperless. It's all paperless. I can assign all of my students something. I create a Google Doc and I assign it to my students, and I can either have them just be able to look at it, or I can have them answer it and turn it back in, or I can have groups work with it. Google Classroom is the best way to go paperless in your classroom that I can even suggest. That being said, your school district has to be Google Apps for Education, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know how that works, but Burville is, so that works for me.
Cross your fingers.
Yes. Hopefully your school district is. So Google Classroom is like them. I have on many occasions, been getting ready for school with my phone there, assigning my students their work for the day. because you can put videos in there, you can put Google Docs in there, you can do all of that. And it's all, like, I can do it from my phone, I can do it from my computer, I can do it from my iPad. It doesn't matter where I am. So that is probably the best thing that I can even imagine. The other software that I use on a regular basis is Nearpod. Another one that, if you use the free version, it's great because it's kind of like an interactive PowerPoint. You can embed videos and quizzes and stuff that your students can interact with. And you can, if you're in a classroom with all of your students with the device, they kind of see what you're doing in front of them. So if they're taking notes, that's really great. The one thing that I really like about it is the homework part of it, which comes with the paid version. But you can individually get a paid version. And that is great for the flipped video because it's like a PowerPoint, but it's sort of video-like. So you can put video clips in it. You can put formative assessment places in there, like what did you just learn from this video that you just watched. Ed Puzzle is also another one like that. You can put a video and that you create questions throughout the video, and all of that information comes back to you. Anytime something can be done paperless, I am all for that kind of technology. If you're not having to actually turn in a sheet of paper to me, I'm good with that.
And now, I'm a reading teacher, so this is a little bit biased of a question, but I'm curious. You know, there are studies on both sides of the spectrum where they talk about reading comprehension on digital devices versus paper. Have you, as someone that's had, you know, people read or students read articles on their iPads or phones or whatever, do you notice any difference in comprehension when it comes to learning digitally or reading paper? Like, is there any in your own classroom, in your own experience?
I don't, but I always offer both. You know, going back to the whole term differentiation, within even the same lesson that I'm teaching to every student, sometimes it will be digital and sometimes it will be actual paper where you have to write. Even I, as a 40-ish year old person, have to, we talked about this the other day, that any professional books that I try to read, if I read them on my device, I can't like physically make notes on those as well as I can. And that's how I process, is by physically, so I can highlight everything and then it will turn it into note cards for me. But being able to like actually physically write something sometimes is difficult. So I try to vary within my classroom. Sometimes we read those things digitally and sometimes we read the actual paper where you are taking notes and annotating, which also helps the language arts teachers do their thing. But I don't know that I've ever really noticed a difference between, but I do have students that prefer to, can I have the paper copy of this? You know, when I make a classroom set of the same reading passage, they would prefer to be able to write on their own and keep it with them because that's how they process. So you just have to, be prepared to, you can't, I don't know that there will be a time, well, there will be a time someday, but right now I don't know that it's appropriate for everything to be digital all the time.
Yeah. And you know what? That's, be prepared is, I think, the underlying theme of this topic, just because technology doesn't always work.
No.
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
And for a variety of reasons. Yeah. But it also, you know, if having choice is important to you in your classroom for your students, being prepared for them not liking what you decided in the first place is probably a good thing to be prepared for. Yeah. Especially if you're trying something new, or if it's a format that can be done multiple ways. Like, I mean, if a video is a core part of your lesson, can't really change that if they don't like watching video,
right? Unless
there's some other medium. But if it's something that can be translated to digital or not, why not? I mean, it might be a little extra back work, but it'll save the headache when you're sitting in class and you're like, oh, what do I do now?
Yeah.
This connects to my next 2 points, which are, I really want to know a horror story from you about using technology. It doesn't have to be awful, right?
Sure.
But just a time that it failed, and then I want to jump to a successful time where it was just magical, and Aladdin riding a carpet. Yes.
Okay, so the worst time for any educator always is when you have somebody in your room that is not a student. So an evaluator or a visitor or anything. And just even this last year, we have a grant specialist who came and visited our rooms all the time. And he was not evaluative, but that doesn't matter to me because anyone in my space, I want it to be perfect all the time. And he came in, and it happened to be a day that the technology was not working. And I spent the first, we have 45 minutes, and I spent probably the first 20 minutes getting everybody online and where they needed to be in order to do this seemingly very simple lesson that they probably could have done if I'd had the textbooks out and available for them. They could have done within that 20 minutes that it took me to get them all online. But the technology that I had in my classroom was failing, and this was towards the end of the year, and I wasn't using it as much anymore because of the issues I was having. And he commented, "Do you think you lost instructional time because of technology?" And that happens, but it had happened increasingly so towards the end of this last year, and it became a place where I stopped fighting and just went back to, I printed out resources for them and did everything by paper and that kind of thing. And it sucks.
Yeah.
Honestly, it sucks when you are prepared to do something digitally and you're so excited about it. You just, every single time you do something digital, you have to be prepared to run around as much, putting out I can't log in and it's asking me if I want to update and it's updating and, trying to figure out those pieces as it is to, you just have to be ready for that. If you're going to do, a class set where everybody's going to be on technology.
Of course, to be fair, I think technology kind of gets thrown under the bus with this because it's like, oh, well, technology failed. And that, that's the negative side of technology is, you never have to charge your book, right? When people talk about ebooks. But it's the thing, this is going to happen to you no matter if you're doing technology or if you're doing a new structure or if you're doing something new. It's going to fall apart at some point.
Yep.
It's
and
going to happen.
You just have to be ready to figure out what you're going to do instead. And by 8th period, you figure out, I'm not going to use whatever to do that. But that's why I like the idea of not a class set. That not everybody has to be doing the same thing at the same time, because if I just have 5 kids on 5 of my 12 devices or whatever I have in the space, then that's, this one kid figures out, well, this isn't working. Well, then go try the other one or put it on your phone or whatever, or it's in the book. But so I kind of, for the technology's sake, I like the idea of not trying to put everybody on it at the same time, because that's where I find the technology fails more often.
Yeah.
We've been through those Dell tablets.
Yeah. Yeah. So that goes with saying too, the quality of technology.
Sure.
If you don't have it, then, rethinking what you're trying to do might be a big thing. Also, a lot of people don't think about this. How strong is your school's Wi-Fi? Right? We're getting updated Wi-Fi, which is going to be great.
Yeah.
But a lot of schools don't have
times,
that.
Yeah.
And there were times where everyone tries to log on and you're like, oh, well, what do you do?
Yeah.
There's no Wi-Fi. I guess. All right. So, Anyway, so that's the negative, right? Something completely collapsing, all of that good stuff. So what's a really great lesson you had, or a time where it just worked like all those wonderful blogs say they're going to work?
Yeah. There are a lot of times when it worked really well. And virtually anything I did where the students turned things in digitally to me was beautiful. When I figured out, and I think Google now has its own way to grade its own Google Forms, but when I figured out Flugaroo would grade Google Forms for me, like that's the worst part of teaching. Yeah. Like, I want to know what my kids did, but I don't want to go through all of the papers and actually grade them. I just want somebody to say, oh, look, here's where you have issues. This question was something that was really awful, or this question was really great. So anytime I can do anything completely digital, I did figure out in middle school, you have your bell work, like the thing that they're supposed to do when they first come in. The first couple of times when I figured out that everybody needed headphones and could watch the video by themselves, and I didn't have to watch it 8 times every day. And that was their bell work. That's a beautiful thing, when it's quiet for a good 5 minutes. And not that I need my students to be quiet, but they're engaged. They're taking notes or watching the video, or like you can hear them chuckle every once in a while because of whatever the presenter in the video has said, then those are those places where I kind of go, when I'm bored because my kids are all doing what they need to do, those are the places where I go, okay, this is good. This is good. Kids are quiet. They're doing, I don't need kids to be quiet, but that they're actually listening to what's happening on whatever they're looking at, or those kinds of things. But
it's like a built-in classroom management tool.
Yes,
pretty much.
Yeah,
it's what it's going for.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah,
so that's good. So there you go. So anyone who's listening to this, thinking about this, you got your negative, what might or will happen at some point, and then that positive moment where you get to step back and you get to take a breath, and you can assess where things happen, and the grading, like I said, the G word comes up all the time. So my final question for you today. Final question. If you were talking to a teacher and they're like, hey, I kind of want to use technology. I see where it's good for people. I see it's good in other classrooms. But I'm scared to do it. What do you tell them?
Well, just like anything, just like you're scared with using a Kagan structure for the first time, you just kind of have to jump in there and do it. If you know somebody that is good at it, go to them first. Maybe they can kind of trade conference times with you and they can come try it with your kids, but just jump out there and do it. I mean, that's ultimately what we have to do in education. We can't just sit back and do the same old, and you just kind of have to jump out there and try it. And if it fails, it's not a big deal. Your kids won't care that it failed. They won't even necessarily realize that it failed. You just kind of go, oh, well, my guinea pigs, you guys, it didn't work today. And the kids are always very forgiving. And then you try again the next day.
Sure.
And that's just, 18 years, that's what I've been doing is I just throw it out there. And if it works, I'm like, woo, party time. But if it doesn't work, then I would just say to the kids, you know what, this totally failed. And I tried it 6 different ways today and it still failed. And we won't be doing this again. We'll try something different. And the kids don't care. They don't care. I found that to be true in elementary school and in middle school.
They get other things going on.
Yeah, whatever. Okay, it didn't work. Let's try something different.
Sure. Yeah, and you know what? I think that's a great place to stop. Just don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Just jump in. What's the worst?
And if you're not sure about it, find somebody who is sure about it.
Sure.
And go to them and have them help you. Yeah. Because that's what we all. Nobody is ever going. No teacher I've ever met is ever going to shut you down. They're just going to say, well, okay, let's see how we can get this to work for you, too. Yeah.
That's what we're in the business to do. Yeah. We do it with our students. We do it with each other.
Yep, that's right.
That's why this podcast exists.
Yep, exactly.
Anyway, we're going to end there. So I want to thank you, Mrs. Melinda Bolles, for doing this for me and talking about technology with us. I'm sure you're going to help a lot of people at our campus and anyone else who decides to listen to this podcast. So thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
Yes. And I would like to end on a quote, as we always do at Teach Me Teacher, which is, technology is just a tool. In terms of getting the kids working together and motivating them, the teacher is the most important. That was Mr. Bill Gates that said that. Anyone listening to this, go to teachmeteacherpodcast.com for more and let us know what you thought about the episode. Share this with your team. Have a good one.